We hope you will enjoy our production of the story of the 37th New York Presentation Flag. We would also like to invite you to view our other historical films on the Cattaraugus County Museum YouTube channel. Cattaraugus County Museum was created as a memorial for Civil War veterans. When it was dedicated in 1914, among the earliest artifacts to the museum was a regimental flag for the 37th New York. That flag hung in the old museum building in Little Valley for several decades, until by the late 1970s, the curator at the time, Lorna Spencer, removed it because the condition was deteriorating. It wasn't until 2020 when we managed to get in touch with the Art Conservation Department up at Buff State. And fortunately, a student at the time, a senior, was interested in taking this on as her senior project. And so she tackled the enormous job of restoring the flag. We didn't know a lot about the history of the flag because many of the early artifacts that the museum was given didn't come with much. And in this case, we had two note cards. One stated that was the 37th New York flag and it had been captured at the Battle of Chancellorsville. The second just had a man's name and an address, W.S. Hubble. Meanwhile, the historian and myself took on the task of trying to trace down as much of the history of the flag that we could find, and it really ended up being an astonishing story.
Presentation flags were a very important part of the heart and soul of regiments on both sides of the American Civil War. And when you received your flag, especially at the beginning of the war, it was usually in a public ceremony with VIP speakers and the agreeable presence of the ladies to make sure the flag was properly delivered and got the full emotional effect expected from it.
The flags were large. A typical Confederate, like an Army of Northern Virginia battle flag, was 4 feet by 4 feet. The U.S. regimental flags were larger.
Its primary purpose from a practical standpoint was to give troops, show troops where the regiment was and to give them a point on which to align themselves. And again, in the course of a battle, when there's smoke in the air, you couldn't see the troops very well, but you could see the battle flags, and a general could, kind of see where his troops were and what needed to be done.
And if a regiment was ordered forward, they were told to guide on the colors. If you had to fall back from your positions, the command would go out, rally on the colors. So they were deemed essential equipment for every regiment, both north and south. And since the colors were such an important part of the regiment, the men of the color guard were handpicked for their courage and their strength and bravery to create a protective force around the colors.
Civil War units were raised locally, and so in your company of 100 men, a lot of those people you knew. Some of them you were related to. The fact that there was a community pride, that there was a state pride, there's national pride, like all of these things are projected onto your flag, in the military.
The 37th New York was known as the Irish Rifles, and it was largely made up of Irish immigrants from New York City. However, two companies from the regiment came from Cattaraugus County, one from Ellicottville and one from Allegany. The regiment went on to take part in many of the major battles in the early part of the war, including Fair Oaks, Malvern Hill, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville.
Robert E. Lee, basically in and around Fredericksburg. Joe Hooker with part of his army on Lee's front, threatening Lee's front, the other half on Lee's rear, threatening to crush Lee in between. Instead of retreating, Robert E. Lee actually comes out and begins attacking Hooker's wing of the army. Lee has part of his army on one side and Stonewall Jackson on the other, with Hooker in the middle. And the spot in the middle that Hooker held, separated Jackson from Lee's forces, was the ground we're standing on right now. Lee and Stuart are going to make massive assaults through the trees on either side of this clearing in an effort again to drive Hooker back into the river. This was, we believe, perhaps the third bloodiest day of the Civil War. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers were struggling to kill one another. Artillery's going off, horses are running, panic-stricken through the ranks. Men are dying, are crying out for help. It was just a scene of absolute pandemonium. The end result being that Joe Hooker, instead of sending up reinforcements and driving Lee back, instead held his reinforcements in hand and allowed the troops here to be defeated by Lee and Stuart.
It was at Chancellorsville, on a spot on the battlefield known as Hazel Grove, that the flag was most likely lost to the Confederates.
There was also an emotional aspect. The flag represented the troops who carried it. And consequently, if troops were very proud of their flag, and if you lost your flag in battle, it was considered to be a great shame. And the soldiers always would pledge that they would, never stain the flag with dishonor and so forth. So if your flag was captured, that was kind of considered dishonorable. It showed that you hadn't fought hard enough for the flags. Because
honor is so important to people, and even if you don't believe in an organized code of honor, the people that you're fighting with are your neighbors. And when they write home, if you shirked your duty, people back at home were going to know about it too. So what happened in the Army didn't stay in the Army. What happened in the Army was written about and sent back home to the families in your community.
American Civil War, our capital did double duty, hosting the Confederate Congress and ongoing meetings of the Virginia General Assembly. And in the Confederacy, flags that were captured in the many battles around Richmond tended to be brought back to the city. Some of them went to the hands of the Confederate government, who did not seem to be disposed to do much of anything with them. But as time goes on, other captured flags, deemed as trophies of war, showcasing the valor of Southern troops, found their way into the Virginia State Library. And the particular flag of interest to these proceedings, the 37th New York Volunteer Infantry's presentation flag, apparently was brought over and put on display in the Confederate Senate chamber.
As for how the flag came back to Cattaraugus County after being captured by the Confederates, we were a bit stumped. It wasn't until historian Sharon Fellows managed to find a newspaper article dated from 1893 that actually described how W.S. Hubble, who turned out to be a William Stone Hubble, presented the flag to the veterans of the Civil War from Cattaraugus County as a gift. Hubble himself turned out to be a fascinating character. Originally from Ellicottville, Connecticut, he served as a captain in the 21st Connecticut Infantry, one of the first Union regiments to enter Richmond at the end of the war. Personal heroics at the Battle of Chaffin's Farm in 1864 led to him receiving the Medal of Honor. At the time he returned the 37th New York flag to Cattaraugus County, he was serving as a minister at North Presbyterian Church in Buffalo. The article from the Ellicottville Post, dated September 20th, 1893, states, "The hearts of the veterans of the 37th Regiment, New York Volunteers, were made glad Tuesday evening at Salamanca by the sight, for the first time after a lapse of 30 years, of their old regimental flag, which up to a short time ago they had supposed was forever lost. The flag was presented to the Veterans Association of Cattaraugus County by the Reverend W.S. Hubble of Buffalo, who secured the flag at the taking of Richmond and who had since had it in his possession. The flag was a beautiful silk one, which was presented to the regiment by the ladies of New York City and was carried in many of the severest battles of the war. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, the flag was captured by the rebels and was not recaptured until the fall of Richmond, when it was found by Captain Hubble in the rebel Senate chamber over the chair of Vice President Alexander H. Stevens. Just as fascinating as the story of the history of the flag is the story of its preservation. Katja Zinsley, the student at the Art Conservation Department of Buff State who took on this task, was here for the opening of this exhibit, and she explains some of what went into this process.
We didn't really know the extent of the damage. It could have been quite substantial, and there might have been huge losses that we wouldn't be able to actually see a lot of information, get information on. So first, we had to test the materials that we used on the flag, so solvents. So we had to test to see what would be safe to use. Mainly what we used overall was water to relax everything. In this section right here, this whole section was completely detached. So I used that section as my test. And so I did a lot of different humidification tests to see what would relax the paint film, because it was all mangled beforehand. And so after I got that fully flat, I then went in this area and along the text in here to remove efflorescence, which is white haziness. And you can see there is some left because sometimes it just doesn't come off, but this entire area was clouded in this white hazy efflorescence that we call in conservation. When it's all done, it goes into the frame. So what we have here is a padded mounting board. It's a pressure mount system, and you can possibly see that there's a dome on this, and so that is because it is more padded in the center to create a dome shape, and it holds the flag in place a little bit so it doesn't slide right off. And it's also on a fabric that kind of has a little bit of texture so that it doesn't also slide off. And so then afterwards you put the plexiglass over to apply pressure, and it's flexible enough where it can conform to the shape. And so that way, if this is completely upright, it's not going to slide down, it's going to stay in place. And then the frame is put around the whole package.
The restored flag is now a permanent display here at the museum, and we hope that you will take the opportunity to come and see it in person.